Aaron Lutzi, Second Nature, a very, very special episode for us here today.
I'm really excited. I'm always excited to record podcasts with you. This is like the ultimate bro pod, though. This is us talking about some big stuff and really sort of like our origin story in some ways.
It's a full circle moment, isn't it? Okay, so not to bury the lead here, the reason Aaron and I wanted to come together for this very special podcast is because there's big news happening in my life in a way that is also relevant to Aaron's life. I am officially being graduated as a Red Bull athlete at the conclusion of 2025, which is only days away as we are recording this. We'll see when this goes up. Just as a reminder to refresh the audience's memory here, we have talked about this before, but Lucy and I came to be connected because he was responsible for recruiting me as a Red Bull athlete. I enjoyed my tenure there, which lasted almost a decade, which is amazing. It went so quick. And I'm leaving now filled with gratitude, pride, and joy. And I think it gives us a really interesting opportunity to talk about this from a number of different directions. I have a bunch of notes written down. I know you do also, Lutzi. But yeah, I'm hopeful this can be a valuable episode just to add some transparency into the full life cycle of being a professional athlete with an important partner. Any other preamble you want to add here?
I think the title of this podcast might be something that scares people, like maybe something like "Everything Comes to an End" or something like that. Which the podcast is not ending, only just a reference to this bit, your sponsorship. But also for the people that maybe like took a deep breath when they saw the title of this podcast, now would be a great time to go and rate this podcast on your favorite podcast player. And it is the end of 2025. Maybe there was a podcast that specifically stood out to you that you want to reference in your review. That would be great too. That stuff helps us and we almost never ask for it. So if you want to give us a little holiday gift, a little rating would be great. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Glad you squeezed that in here at the top. So maybe let's start. I compiled a list of sort of 5 important takeaways. You don't have any visibility into this, but I'd love to just unleash some of these and have you respond. Of course, the language that I used, being graduated as a Red Bull athlete, it's a nice way of saying, you're more or less getting fired. This was a very collaborative, open process, and I'm really grateful for it. I leave with nothing but positive feelings. I'm excited to talk about it. But yes, at a certain point, every athlete's professional career comes to a close. Every partnership, no matter how positive and long term, comes to a close. And I think this is a good example of how to do it in the right way. So launching into my 5 takeaways here, Lutzi. First, and maybe most importantly, Aaron Lutzi is the best. Okay? Let's just establish that. Just for the audience here, if you are unfamiliar, again, Lutzi was the one who recruited me to the brand where I enjoyed a 10-year career. You also inspired me to start Free Trail. You are now my partner on this podcast, Second Nature. You're one of my best friends in the world, the single most impactful person in my entire career. And none of this would have happened without you. So first and foremost, a big thank you to you, Mr. Aaron Lutzi.
Wow, man. Chills. I mean, I feel like it is or should be every person who is in my position's goal to one day hear those words from the people that they've had the opportunity to work with. And this has obviously been a two-way street. Like there was only so much I can do. There was only so you had to meet me and I had to meet you on this whole thing. And I feel so lucky that we got a chance to work together on all this stuff, and also that I was in the position that I was in to do all the things that we could. And a lot of it came more from creativity than budget, but certainly like we had the right level and the right people supporting us to be able to do so much. And I think you've also built up. I mean, thinking about all the people that have also played a big role in your career, man, you've been lucky with some pretty stellar people around you beyond just me.
Yeah.
big shout out to Harmony and Ryan and even the crew like Lisa Burns, who we'll get to, I'm sure, Matt Sharkey. Like so many people have played a role in your career. I'm one of the lucky ones, but man, the list has got to be long.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to start there because it's true, and I
Thanks,
really
man.
appreciate it.
It means a
I really
lot.
appreciate you, and I know you know that, but just sharing that here publicly, face to face via Riverside and for our audience, you are the best. Which is also an elegant transition to the second point, which is to also throw thanks to Lisa Burns. And we've talked about this on the podcast in the past. She is our connective tissue. She was my athlete manager at the North Face. She ultimately left the North Face to join Red Bull. At that point, she flagged to Aaron Lutzi that there may be a potential recruit in the trail and ultra running space that might be interesting. The rest is history, as we say. And as we've talked about here on the pod, relationships are everything, and I owe so much to Lisa, not only for signing me to the North Face, which changed my life at the time, but also in putting me in connection with you and getting me ultimately signed with Red Bull. The two, unquestionably the two most important moments of my athletic career, from just like a pure, business and personal establishing of opportunity to exist as a quote unquote professional athlete. Wouldn't have been possible without Lisa Burns either. So I wanted to say thanks to her publicly too.
What's incredible is that everything that comes our way always comes through some relationship, and you just never really know how it's going to shake out. All you can really do is be who you are, and show up with integrity everywhere. But it is so clear every single time something comes together, you can immediately draw it back to a relationship somewhere. It's just impossible to know. Like, you had no idea. I mean, sure, when you first met Lisa and she was at North Face, it was probably pretty clear, like, if I'm friendly with this person, I'm stand a chance of being on the North Face team. But you could have never known where she was going to go after that. And I think that's the interesting thing about our industry, is that people move, people grow, people create and develop other opportunities along their pathway in their career. And so acting with integrity and building relationships and showing up in a meaningful way, it may impact your current sponsorship situation, but it may also play out down the line as well when that person moves on or gets another opportunity that you get to sort of follow along, and they open a door for you again. One of the best things, I mean, Lisa, when she first got to Red Bull, was like, yeah, we need more like outdoor athletes on this roster. Like, I see all these extreme athletes and stuff, but like, there's a huge opportunity that we're missing. And I've got this roster of athletes that I worked with at North Face, and some of them would actually be a pretty good fit. And I remember her sitting down with me and be like, you and Dylan Bowman, I bet you two would be like fast friends. I bet you guys would be able to do some cool stuff together.
Look at us 10 years later. We got our own podcast. Thank you, Lisa Burns. My third point on the list here is just to say what an honor. What an honor it was. Being a Red Bull athlete is the pinnacle. It is what every pro athlete aspires to, at least people in outdoor and action sport. If you are gifted with the opportunity to wear a Red Bull hat or a Red Bull helmet, you basically are signaling to the world of like, more or less, I made it, right? And I do, just in retrospect, feel it was such an honor. And I'm so grateful to have had that period of my life that I got to experience it. It was amazing.
I'm really curious to know from you, what was it like being one of the early trail runners? Because I think Carl was on and Ryan down in South Africa. But other than that, there weren't really any other trail runners that I can think of that were on the brand. So did it feel like kind of an undefined role? I mean, here we are like throwing people out of space and throwing down big skate ramps all over the place, and you're like, well, I'm gonna go run 100 miles now. Like, what was that like going into it? Did you feel overwhelmed? Did you feel like, I need to define this? Like, how did you approach that mentally?
Carl Meltzer was always a hero of mine, and he was one of the earliest touch points I had with the sport, one of the early inspirations that made me curious about getting involved in trail running personally. And so just having your hero sort of precede you in that way, somebody who I had the opportunity to race at least a couple of times, and who is the most winningest 100 miler in history. At the same time, Ryan Sands has been sort of my long term contemporary in the sport. He's a couple of years older than me, but we more or less came into the sport and matured within it at the same time. And but he always was somebody that you look to as inspiration for how to approach things professionally. And as you know, Lutzi, I've always just been a massive fan of sports and especially of professional athletes, and just being able to kind of look to those guys as being guiding lights and examples, but also like being very excited for my entire tenure about Red Bull getting more deeply involved in the sport of trail running. And I want to continue to talk about that because, it seems like right now they are even more curious about their potential and how they can impact the sport in a positive way. And I want to talk about that. But yeah, it was a little bit more novel, but still there aren't, from my perspective, there still aren't enough Red Bull athletes in trail running. And I think and hope and trust that um, that will change here in the not too distant future. And actually, I hope I'm able to have some impact on that too. So moving to my fourth bullet point here, if you're ready.
Mhm.
This is how healthy partnerships end. And I know we want to spend some time on this one, but maybe we just do a top line now and you can respond and we can dig in more later. But the conversation that I had with my new athlete manager and her boss was very friendly, and when they delivered the news of, we're not going to be extending your contract, it was not a surprise. This has been a multi-year collaborative, open, honest conversation. In between my most recent athlete manager and you, Lutzi, I had a different athlete manager also. These conversations started with him, right? A couple of
Mhm.
years ago, of just me being honest of like, hey, I want to race at a high level. Right now, I'm really just have to focus on free trail and my family. Just a lot is happening in my personal and professional life right now. But I do want to race. I do want to race, but also like I understand if and when it's time to move on. No pressure from my end. I appreciate everything. And they charitably, you could say generously, kept me on for probably a couple more years than they should have, if we're being honest. And by the time they delivered the news, it was, you know, I could tell they were nervous to deliver it and they were relieved that I received it in from a perspective of gratitude um, of understanding. And I can obviously certainly see it from their perspective. I'm almost 40, Lutzi, as you know. I am not a Red Bull athlete anymore. And I can be honest with myself and admit that, like I'm just not. When you think of the archetypal Red Bull athlete, actually, I remember going through my testing program, which we can talk about later. In the gym that day were Lindsey Vonn and Miles Chambly Watson, who were maybe two of the most visible Red Bull athletes at that time. And at that point, I felt, I feel like I can fit in to
Mhm.
this club, and I will thrive with the opportunity to rise to this occasion. I don't feel that way anymore. I'm not a Red Bull athlete. Um, I don't carry what that means within me or in my career anymore. And it is the right time. We'll come back and talk more about this later, but in all likelihood, we will continue to work with Red Bull through Free Trail, just not through me as an individual, which leads me to my fifth and final point, unless there's something you want to respond to.
We're going to get to this a little bit later, but I do feel like not every conversation goes that smooth. I've been in many of those conversations, and that was a big reason why, we sort of started laying the foundation for your sort of like second mountain so early on, so that that conversation could go like that, because a lot of people don't have sort of a second mountain identified until after that conversation happens, which makes that conversation a very difficult conversation. I remember the day that you called me, it was like you literally hung up with Red Bull and then called me, I think, right afterwards. And I remember feeling like this sense of relief that you had done the enough of the right things throughout your career there so that that would not be a catastrophic day for you. It didn't feel like it on the phone that that was a catastrophic thing. It can be for a lot of other people, but the pieces that we collectively put in place over the length of your career made it so that that day wouldn't be catastrophic, and that was premeditated probably like 6 or 7 years ago, and I cannot tell you how relieved I was
Yeah.
that it actually worked, like, "Oh, okay, like, we're okay," you
We're
know?
okay. That's it. We're okay, you know? And here's just a quick anecdote that will build on your point and lead me to my fifth and final lesson here. Harmony joined me on the call with Red Bull because, she and I are partners in every aspect of our life. And when we got off the call, honestly, I felt good about it. Harmony was weeping because what this signifies, that's my final personal sponsor. By definition, I am no longer a professional athlete. And it feels right. Honestly, it feels right. And like anticipating that this was going to come to pass, or knowing that it was a very high likelihood of it coming to pass, I was seriously contemplating, officially publicly announcing my retirement from trying to race competitively. But then, Lucy, as you know, I got drawn in the Hard Rock lottery 2 weeks ago. And it's ironic that for the first time in a few years, I actually feel super motivated to get fit again, to race and compete, even though by definition I am no longer a pro athlete. But what is freeing, what gives me that motivation, honestly, is that fact that I now have the opportunity to really just do it for myself again. And that's really where the magic started to begin with, that put me on this path, that gave me all these amazing opportunities, including this partnership with Red Bull. But it is also like the symbolic closing of a chapter, right? And if I can't make my comeback here in my attempt to get fit for Hard Rock, it's over for me, and I'm totally at peace with that. This is my final attempt at it. And I'm grateful for the decade that I had with Red Bull. I'm no longer a professional athlete in by the textbook definition, but at the same time, ironically, I feel motivated right now. So those were my 5 points. Aaron Lutzi is the best. Thank you, Lisa Burns. What an honor it was. This is how healthy partnerships end. And also, I'm no longer a pro athlete. Those are my 5 bullet points, Lutzi.
That's the chapter. I think if there's any lesson that I've learned throughout my life is that you can have different chapters and they can go different ways. I was a pro athlete younger, a way long time ago, and then I went and worked professionally for a long time. And then at age 44, I signed another pro contract. So who knows, man? I think you never need to actually officially retire because you never know how you're going to bring value to people. What you've done over the last decade has created immense value for people in different ways. And the building blocks that you've been putting together with Free Trail specifically over the last however many years have created a new set of values. And there are other brands out there that can benefit from that in such a major way. And we've seen it. So I think never say never on this stuff. I love that you're gonna race hard rock for yourself. And I feel like the lack of pressure in a way, not I don't know. I don't think I ever intentionally put pressure on you. You could tell me if I'm wrong, but like hopefully you never felt pressure from any of your partners to perform. Hopefully, you always felt like you just had the support to go do your thing. And hopefully, this time too, you just feel like you have support from all of us to go do your thing. If you
Yeah.
got to go be shred monk again, where you disappear into the mountains for a month and then you come back out and have this like amazing experience at Hard Rock, that'd be pretty okay with all of us, you know?
Yeah.
And I'd love to see that. And if not, if it just becomes like a fun, run around some giant mountains in Colorado and you cross the finish line with a smile on your face, that's great too. Like
Yeah.
whatever. Like you are allowed to love the sport that you participate
Yeah.
in any capacity.
Yeah. But at the same time, it is different. It is
Yeah.
it's a totally different way to interface with a sport when you're not being paid to do it or to be good at it anymore,
Yeah.
and you can just like actually enjoy it for what it is. So, where do you want to go next, Lucy?
Wow. Well, the sort of takeaways I think really help define for everyone listening sort of like what came out of this chapter. But I feel like there are a lot of lessons for people that are both on the brand side and the athlete side and everywhere in between that kind of came out through the course, the timeline of this partnership. And so I was thinking it might be kind of fun. I made some notes sort of chronologically of how this whole thing went. And I feel like it'd be kind of fun to just go through it. And we can kind of call out some different stuff. We can share some stories and just really sort of celebrate this near decade of high fives and Red Bull, I guess.
All right, where do you want to launch?
So we talked about Lisa Burns sort of making the introduction between the two of us, and really like the first step in every good partnership is building the relationship, right? And we got the introduction from Lisa, and then we met for the first time at was it Betty's Ocean View Cafe just outside of Berkeley, right?
Yep.
I would love to know from you what was that first. I mean, it was almost like, to be fair, this was almost like a preordained partnership because I knew that Lisa was backing you and she was the decision maker for the US. The global team would have to eventually sign off on it, but really I just needed to feel really comfortable with you and just get to know you so that I could start already brainstorming what we were going to do together. So that was like my mindset going into this, like, okay, he's probably cool if he's friends with Lisa, and I've researched him online. I know this guy's good at what he does, but I want to know like the real Dylan. And we had maybe exchanged a couple text messages or whatever. I flew to San Francisco, I think, just for that meeting to meet up with you for breakfast. I remember you wearing like a button up shirt, which was kind of funny.
That's what I was gonna say. I remember I like kind of got dressed up like it was a job interview.
I was coming into it a little bit more casually, but yeah, like I mean, Red Bull
Well, I
obviously like
recognize the gravity of it, It's like, dude, this could change your career, You better show up your best self. I was younger at the time, like maybe that wasn't the appropriate attire to wear, but it was symbolic of the seriousness with which I wanted to meet this potential opportunity. And Lisa and I had a strong relationship, obviously, at that point too. So I guess I did feel confident about it. Um, didn't know like how long the process was going to take. We can get into that because it did take basically an entire year from the time we had that breakfast to when you presented me with my hat for the first time.
yep.
But I would, from memory, I think the one thing I do remember is that I overdressed for the occasion and that I was very excited about it. Beyond that, it's hard to remember.
It's one of those things where this is actually the most important part. Like our friendship drove so much of everything that was to come. Having me as an advocate, like the communication that we had, the openness that we had, like that's actually what drove the success of the partnership. And I think, meeting for, breakfast is like sort of the beginning of that stuff and sort of feeling each other out and trying to understand each other. And I think for me, especially when it came time to be that advocate for you, the more information I had, the more anecdotes I had, the more detail I had, the stronger my case became to kind of get you in the door.
I think this is like kind of one of the most important thing that people can take away from this is the importance of having that very open dialogue
Yeah.
with your partners, like
Like,
about all the good and all the bad, so that there's never any surprises in either direction.
mhm.
If you're going through a really hard time, you're injured, your personal life is in disarray, you don't need to share every last detail with your partners, but at least flagging to them like, hey, I'm going through something right now. This is what I'm doing to try and get better. It gives them the opportunity to also chip in ideas or resources to help you get better in that moment. But like the perfect example for me and for Red Bull is like, this, like I said, this has been a multi-year conversation with them. And I was mature enough to have the awareness of like, okay, like you haven't put a race result up in a long time. Like, yeah, you're still, having an impact on the sport in a very different way. But like, I had the presence of mind to just have these honest conversations of like, listen, I know I'm not performing, and here's other ways in which I'm contributing. Here's like my plan for the future, though it's hard to see a real path forward towards professional competition again. Like, I do want to do it, and them being able to give me feedback on that stuff too, and ultimately come to the conclusion for themselves that this was the right time to wind down the partnership after several years of us working through it together. Like, that's how I feel like every athlete should approach their partnerships like that, and reverse too. Every athlete manager should really be doing a lot of that check in, especially when things aren't going well. And also, like, be upfront at the very beginning of like, how, in a perfect world, how could this relationship end in a good way for you, even if it's many, many years down the line? Athlete managers should be thinking about that.
Yeah, the long-term exit strategy, which we're definitely going to get to.
Yeah.
One thing that sort of strikes as well is that there was never a pitch deck from you to me. I've made one, which we're going to get into here in a second, but I think a lot of people out there are putting a lot of energy into creating this perfect 5-page pitch deck, which is not wrong. It's helpful to have when the time comes, but they forget that you need to have the relationship first and then the pitch deck is to follow, not the other way around. It's not, no pitch deck is going to get you sponsored. It's going to be the relationship. It's going to be that back and forth and how well that person feels like they can work with you. I think that people spend so much time like trying to get every word right, every image, every detail, every demographic, whatever it's going to be on that deck. And yeah, it's great to have a good one pager or a good deck that you can pass on. It helps that athlete manager carry you through the rest of the discussion. You don't have the relationship to start. It's just not, it's going to be so much harder. And I'm just seeing pitch deck after pitch deck of people like sending it to me, like, what do you think about this? And I'm like, do you know them? Do you know what they even want? Like, what conversations have you had already? What does it look like? Are you delivering what they need even? Like, does
Yep.
this deck even deliver what they need? It's great that you're good at PowerPoint, but that's not actually the thing that's going to get you there. So, yeah, the relationship element was so, so important. And if you're going to put your energy anywhere, put it there before you put it into a PowerPoint.
Yeah.
Let's
Do you
talk
want to?
about, oh, good.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, do you want to pull up the PowerPoint? I'm
Oh,
sure
I've
people
got
would
it.
love to see it.
I got it right here. Okay.
Yeah, so just for the audience, so you sent this to me again yesterday. I hadn't laid my eyes on it in a while. It's very nostalgic.
With your permission, I'll put it in the Slack channel.
Please.
I don't think there's anything in here that's super proprietary. In fact, this pitch deck is banned within Red Bull because actually it was too effective. I signed like an obscene amount of athletes in a very short amount of time. Short amount of time at Red Bull is like a couple year span. Okay, it
Yeah.
takes longer because it's more about relationship. There's a business planning phase, all that kind of stuff. But like, I signed a lot of people in a short amount of time because this thing was built and it was bulletproof. It was
Again,
like you look at this thing and you're like, no way can you say no to this dude.
first point of the podcast. Aaron Lutzi's the best. They had to change the rules because you're so good.
I broke the rules. What can I say? Okay,
Break it
so
down. Yeah, break it down.
what's really interesting to me, like I know I just made this point about like a pitch deck isn't going to change anything for you, but actually when I was looking through this pitch deck yesterday, I was like, this doesn't actually look like any pitch deck I've ever seen anyone submit to a brand. This is an internal deck at the time. And we would have to basically pitch it, like our national team, like this is who we want to run or who we want to add to the team. And then we would also have to go into a global business planning presentation where we would pitch our new athletes. So it'd have to get first blessed by the US, which we talked about earlier. We knew Lisa was going to like give it the thumbs up no matter what, because we're all friends. And she believed that you would be a great fit, which you're obviously right. I had to then pitch it to the Austrians to say, hey, this is our guy, and this is where he sits globally. The purpose of this deck, why I created it, was that actually what used to happen is you'd go into a meeting with a single slide with like the athlete's image and like their social channels or whatever. And then you would just say, like, yeah, this is why we like them. And what Austria would do, they'd go to like their people in each individual sport and be like, what do you think of this guy? And it would be whoever their homie was in trail running or mountain biking or skateboarding or whatever, who I sometimes knew and sometimes didn't know. And they'd ask that person. And then that person would have like an outsized impact on who we signed or didn't sign. I have an opinion about this, but I'm going to leave it on the side for now.
Yep.
So this presentation was basically meant to offset that by collecting more information that would be indisputable, which we're going to get into. Basically, you would look like a real jerk if you said no after looking through this presentation because it was indisputable that this was an obvious choice and you'd be silly not to. Okay,
Love it.
so if you're in the Slack channel, there's a PDF in there. Hopefully nobody from Red Bull gets upset at me. This is like a 10-year-old doc, so I think I'm probably safe. So
Statute of limitations is expired.
so the first slide is obviously like a picture of you crossing the finish line first. It's got like your date of birth, your discipline, your hometown, and then like your social channels. But the next slide is actually your relationship with Red Bull. And it starts, I started using Red Bull long before I became an endurance athlete. As a collegiate lacrosse player, my mom used to bring a case of Red Bull to our home games, which the team would happily consume for some halftime motivation. And then you talk about how in trail running it's equally important, and you have it on long training days and immediately after, and how your support crew always has it. And then you use it specifically in the second half of races, and how you mix it and how you use it. Those anecdotes of actual product usage feel very real. And I've been working with some other athletes that want to become Red Bull athletes. I'm like, tell me about how you drink Red Bull. Like, tell me about your, like, how does it fit into your program? They're like, oh, I want to do like Red Bull projects. I'm like, no, 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 no. Like, that's not it. If you have a partner that you want to work with, how are you already using their stuff?
Mhm.
Tell me a credible anecdote that I can tell someone else. Like, hey, they're already on the program. They're already down for the cause. We are just pouring fuel on the fire by creating this relationship in a more official way. But they already understand why this is important, why this is useful. I think I don't have the picture in here, but I had a picture of you like drinking a Red Bull in the middle of
Yep.
a race even
I
before.
remember it. I'm just scrolling through the deck myself right
Yeah.
now, but I do remember supplying you with a photograph of me from the 2011 Leadville 100 of me sort of walking through an aid station with a can
Yeah.
in my hand, being like, "Listen, dude, this is authentic." I mean, all that stuff was true going back to my lacrosse days. And one of the things that I've really tried to reinforce with Red Bull over the years is that trying to help them understand why trail running was an interesting market
Mhm.
for them to have more of an influence within is the fact that it's actually a product that helps you with performance, helps you in competition in a way that it doesn't in surfing or skating or these other sporting verticals where Red Bull has always been dominant and present. So that was part of our pitch too, is like, this is a growing sport and it's a sport where the product actually works. It's not just a branding exercise. It's not just a content opportunity.
I thought about this from a regional standpoint as well of, hey, we're not really doing much with, trail races or anything like that, any sort of endurance stuff. But like if we had Dylan, it would make a lot more sense for us to approach Western states or Way Too Cool or any other litany of Northwest based or, West Coast based endurance events that we could partner with because we're like, hey, we have trail runners on our roster. We would like to do more. It would be not disingenuous, but it wouldn't have as much weight behind it if we approach those without supporting the scene already. It made those conversations a lot easier when we came in to support Western states for the handful of years that we did, or when we came to provide product to the people that do Way Too Cool and all those other events and stuff like that. It made sense.
Dude, these photos bring back amazing memories. Incredible.
All right, let's keep it going. So the next slide is a little bit more background just to give the team a little bit of detail. But really, slides 5 and 6 and 7. Oh, I forgot. I talked to Mario for this too. So the next three slides are arguably three of the most credible people in the space at the time and still giving like full throated uh support to Dylan becoming a Red Bull athlete. So the first one is Carl, the second one is Ryan, and then Mario Fraioli is the third one. All of them basically saying like Dylan's the best, he's the man. And the thing is, like the people within Red Bull are going to know, obviously, the first two are existing Red Bull athletes, and the third is like a major voice within trail running media. To have all three of those people be like, hey, this is undisputedly the next guy. Red Bull needs to be behind this guy. It sort of circumvented, like, oh, I guess we don't need to talk to our buddy that's in trail running. We already have like all of the top voices in trail running saying that this guy is the man.
Yeah. This is a good point too, and reinforces what we talked about earlier with Lisa Burns, because the thing that Lisa did when she was vetting me for the North Face before I came to Red Bull was she touched base with everybody who is a current athlete on the North Face trail running team at that time. I was in my early to mid 20s, establishing myself in the sport, but, not certainly a household name, I wouldn't say. And people like Timothy Olson, Stephanie Howe, Mike Wolf, Mike Foote, they were already on the team and in a position where when Lisa asked them, what do you think about Dylan? They, again, it's all about relationships, right? These people were my friends. They were my peers and competitors on the race course. But, I've always been a relationship builder. It benefited me to get Lisa's trust from the North Face. Like that preempted Lisa thinking I was a good candidate for the North Face. And then when Lisa left, of course, as we've already talked about. So similar, seeing this in the deck now, it's a similar process, right? Having good relationships with Carl and Ryan, who were basically the two trail runners at the time, having them vouch for me, obviously massively impactful when making an argument internally. Plus Mario Fraioli, who has been a long time, very powerful voice in the sport, who's a previous guest on the podcast. And all three of these individuals, Carl, Ryan, Mario, I remain very close with. It's all about the relationships. 10 years later, still being able to look at this and, be grateful that these guys would put their name and reputation on the line to boost me. And still a decade later, feeling really close with all three of them. And I would happily return the favor if I ever could for each and every one of them.
Absolutely. Okay, next slide in here is a little bit of a race highlight, which I feel like is, it just establishes like, cool, he's good. He's good at this stuff. First place of all these different events over the last couple of years. And then we have a race schedule for the year coming up, which I think is really important because it's great that you can show your race results, but like as an incoming sponsor, you get zero value from that. Like, oh, cool, you won a race without my branding on you. Like, why should I care other than just to verify that you're not just, you know, this is to know like, okay, cool. He has clout. He has already demonstrated success, but we obviously expect more success in the future. And then here we have your 2016 race schedule. So yeah, this is what it's going to look like for the next year of your stuff. Actually, now that I look at it, I don't know if you did any of these races in 2016.
It definitely looked very different, but
Yeah, but
hard to
that's okay.
remember off the top of my head, but it was definitely different than as we spelled it out. Of course, plans change frequently, but
Yep.
the spirit of it was accurate, right? There's also just sort of like bigger picture goals, like
Yep.
win the Ultra Trail World Tour and a bunch of different races that I wanted to compete in during that time. It's fun to look back at this.
Yeah. I think actually the next and last slide in the deck is the most important one because as a brand, it's like, okay, so say we sign this guy, then what? Like, what does the future really look like? And we laid out not just the upcoming year of what you were going to do as a race schedule, but it was like, here are the target events the year after that. Here are the target events the year after that. And then here are project ideas of stuff that we want to do together, like the volcano project and this FKT and that FKT. And we laid out like what a 3-year vision of the partnership was going to look like, which I think like we could really get a hold of now. But the fact that we laid out not just like, yeah, he had good race results and he's going to do these races. It was like, no, here's what our, like if we signed a 3-year deal with him right now, this is what we would do. all we have to do is just get the check done and we'll go just knock down this
Yeah.
list. Like,
Which is it's an important thing that I learned from you, Lucy, and for the aspiring professional athletes who listen to the show. When you're having this dialogue with partners, right? It's important to be future oriented. Yeah, you can hang your hat on the accomplishments that you've earned to this point, but say you're negotiating a 3-year contract as we were at this point. I mean, negotiating is not the right word, but at least you were making that proposal internally. How can you sketch the vision for the entirety of that 3-year package, right? Not just like, hey, what are you doing the next 6 months? So it's like, let's set like a really long-term vision of what this might look like. And as we see, looking at this, it turned out to be very different from what ultimately transpired in that first 3-year deal that we did. But the spirit of it remains, right? Like setting ambitious goals in the sport, both competitively and from a more adventurous project perspective. And, I think a lot of the times people are myopically focused on like short to medium term rather than long term. And I think it would behoove athletes to have that longer term vision in your head and be able to communicate it eloquently. And also similarly for people that were in your position, right? Of like communicating to the athlete, like, okay, if we're going to do a 3-year deal, what here's like what it would look like for us to make this work worth it, right? Like
mhm.
we're not just going to think about the next race that you have coming up and then the one after that. Like let's think about what this looks like in 2029, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it gives you as an athlete and as a brand time to like really build out the execution and the activation and the vision of what you're going to do instead of just looking at the first thing that's in front of you of like, if I had 3 years to really let this thing breathe, like what would be the steps that I would do? And what is that kind of bell curve of like building up to it, doing it, and then really getting the value out of the thing that I did, you know?
Yeah.
There's so much value to be pulled out of every project. And I think that was really interesting in this one too, because it was like, I'm going to do these races and then I want to do these projects. So you are creating additional surface area, not just as like, choose me as a racer. It was like, I'm going to do things other than racing with you. And these are the ideas that I want to explore together,
Hmm.
where there's more of a media angle that could come out of this project or this project or this project. There's a lot there.
Yep. A lot there.
So we know that I was eventually successful with this pitch, but I would love to know from you what that year of essentially waiting on me to just like run the Austrian gauntlet felt like.
Yeah, okay. So the compressed version of this is that my God, did it take freaking forever for you to get this over the line? But I came to understand that that was normal. Couple of fun anecdotes for the audience, and forgive me if we've talked about this in the past, but one thing I do remember is you calling me and saying like, "Hey, can you go to LA next Tuesday?" Or no, you texted me. Can you go to LA next Tuesday? This is when I knew I was in the pipeline, but not a Red Bull athlete yet. I said, sure, whatever it takes, happy to do it. You said, okay, cool. I'm going to have everything booked for you. I'll call you later and discuss. And then you called me and you said, yeah, so there's this big like run club that's having an event and we want you to speak at it. And it was like 3 days notice, right? So I'm like, oh my God, this guy is like sending me to go just talk impromptu in front of 250 people, like without really much guidance. Like this has got to be a test, if I'm up to the task of like public speaking and just like airdropping myself into an event. And anyway, I don't know if that was really your motivation. I don't think it was, but it went well. Lisa was there to sort of guide me. You weren't there in person, but ended up being solid. And then I recall sort of the final hurdle to cross was to do my performance testing. And you called me and said, hey, can you go to Austria? And at the time, I was like in between races, and it really was just very inconvenient and borderline impossible for me to go. But again, I said, I can do it if I need to do it, but I'd prefer you introduced the option of doing it in LA. And I said, I'd prefer to do it in LA. You said, no problem. We'll get it set up. Went to LA. I think it was only a couple weeks later and went through a battery of tests that included like a VO2 max and lactate threshold, a bunch of like hand-eye coordination stuff, like it was very interesting and very cool. And again, this is where Lindsey Vaughn and Miles Shambly Watson are working out in the gym. It's like total pinch me moment for a sporting fan to be there, be able to pick their brains and stuff as two very iconic Red Bull athletes. And then it was radio silence for another month after that. And I thought, God damn it. I went all the way to the end, and turns out my VO2 max isn't high enough. And I didn't meet the benchmark of what it means to be a Red Bull endurance athlete. But then lo and behold, I don't remember how it was communicated, but basically it was, I made it through the process, and you came down, delivered my hats. We did a little photo shoot, and we were off to the races.
Oh, that was a really cool photo shoot, actually, now that I think about it.
But it was a full year. It was a full year of me just being like, come on, come on. And this is important, as you and I both like have experienced this, but it always takes longer than you want.
Yeah.
This is stuff that we talk about with business all the time too, but for athletes too, you're like desperate to just sign the contract and get going. And it's always takes longer than you want it to, or longer than you expect it to. And that was certainly the case with our partnership at Red Bull, but ultimately you got it across the line, and here we are.
I remember, I don't know if I said this with you, but around that time, my first conversations with an athlete after I'd like done my homework and was like pretty sure it was going to head in that direction. I used to ask people, which is like, it sounds funny, but I used to sit across from them and say, "Do you want to be a Red Bull athlete?" And of course, the answer like, "Yeah, obviously." But then I would follow up with like, "Okay, if that's true, this process is going to take probably 18 months. Like, if you truly want to be a Red Bull athlete, like we'll start this journey and it's going to take a little bit of time to get all through this, but like I need to know now if you're down because I don't want to do this unless I know for sure that you're in." And because I believe already if I'm sitting across from you that you have what it takes to make it through this gauntlet that I'm about to spend a lot of time pushing you through. But yeah, like I need to know that you're down for sure.
Yeah,
And I don't know if I ever said that to you, but I definitely adopted that around that time of like, do you want this?
which I did. Which I did.
So
Otherwise, I wouldn't have tolerated the year it took of waiting.
So one thing that I think Red Bull does that's really interesting that we sort of just touched on really briefly, but I think this is important. When we sign a Red Bull athlete, we spend a day doing content capture of photo, video assets that we can immediately use on the website, social media, full like perfect branding, can in hand, all of the different things. And then we're set up to like start building project decks and start putting the team page together and all the other things that you're going to need. That's the first thing that we do as soon as we sign. And so I'm pretty sure that was it. I came, gave you your stuff, and then we just went and hammered out that first photo shoot so that we could put you in Red Bull content pool. We could start putting you in presentations. We could start using you basically everywhere. One other thing that I want to talk about that I think is important, and if you're okay with it, is your actual contract. We won't talk numbers, but we should talk percentages. If from memory, I believe the contract was 50% salary, just like here you go. 25% bonus, which was dedicated to looking through like your race schedule we picked out. Hey, these are the races that are the most important to both of us collectively for you to do this well. And this is what it would get if you first, second, third it. And then I think there may have been an FKT bonus in there, like, oh, if you knock down an FKT, we'll give you whatever. And then the remaining 25% was performance support, which I think you really made good use of, where it was if you need to fly somewhere, we'll book the flight, hotel, whatever, but also like any coaching, any, massage therapy, whatever it was going to be. I think you even used it for the Shred Monk time when you like went and
Yep.
rented a house and just trained at elevation before a big event. So I think that's a really important chunk where it was just like, we want to make sure that you're successful. You obviously have access to the facilities in LA, but if you need other stuff, you have resources to make that stuff happen.
Funny stuff here. Okay, the reason I'm laughing is because this conjured a bunch of good memories. I remember when you sent me the contract specifics for the first time, and reviewing it with Harmony and just being psyched. Like generous, fair but generous, and clearly was going to take my earning power and my support beyond financial support to a new level. And a couple of things I would love to flag here that I think are important. Going back to the point that Aaron Lutzy is the best. I broke my ankle in 2019. At this point, I'd been with the brand for 3 or 4 years. First person to come and see me, because I actually happened to be in Oregon at the time. The following day, Lutzy took time out of his day to come meet a sulking Debo at a coffee shop whose ankle was in a cast, using crutches. And of course, as an athlete, you just see your career flash before your eyes. And of course, the only thing he says is just focus on getting better, dude. Don't worry, you're set with us. You're set, and removing that fear, amazing and priceless for an athlete. The other thing that was amazing too is going to the non-financial support that Red Bull, I think, is really maybe not famous enough for what they provide to athletes. Of course, everybody recognizes it as basically the brand to be sponsored by, but what they do to support athletes beyond just giving them the opportunity to focus on things and not worry about the economics of it as much is giving them access to things like the high performance center. And I remember when I broke my ankle, I went down to LA 2 separate times to basically just get rehab work done totally for free. Brand put me up, probably had thousands and thousands of dollars of treatment done on my body, on my foot, on my ankle that did accelerate my return back to health and competition. But those things I think are underappreciated, right? Like, yeah, the paycheck was great and amazing, but the interpersonal relationship of, easing my mind in a really, really rough moment of like, dude, just focus on getting better. Don't worry about anything else. And then actually pulling out all the stops to help me get better. Like, that is what partnership is. And yeah, anyway, I do recall though, reviewing that first contract being like, of course, because when you receive it, you're like, oh, do we negotiate or whatever? And I was like, dude, sign it, return it, let's go.
I don't I don't know if anybody's ever really negotiated a first Red Bull contract. Sure, the
Right.
second, like
But of
the
course
RIA, but the
you feel
first
like,
one,
I mean, at least where I was at in my career at the time, I was like, okay, well, you got to read this contract. And like, if there's stuff that comes that feels like you don't understand it or that doesn't feel fair or whatever, you got to use your voice. Like, if you're committing to something for a few years, you got to understand what you're committing to. And I recall it being like, no brainer, done deal, let's go. John Hancock on the dotted line. And yeah, it was great. Which also reminds me, because we could talk about the second contract too.
okay.
Um, I mean, I know we've talked about this. I don't know if it was on Second Nature or elsewhere. It's been a while for sure, but that second contract was at the end of 2018. I had an awesome season in 2018, and I was renegotiating with both the North Face and Red Bull at the time. And I remember I was, for the first and only time in my career, entertaining the idea of hiring an agent to help
Mhm.
me through this process because I was 33 or something like that. Like, I felt like this is probably the most important contract cycle of my career, just based on my age, being in my prime. And I reached out to you, and you know, basically, you're like, "Hey, buddy, listen, you introduce an agent into this process. I've already got your back. I'm going to get you everything I can for you. You introduce an agent into this process, it's just going to slow things down and make it harder for me to continue to have, the ultimate buy-in." And I just really appreciated that too, just being like, "Oh, of course, Lutzy's my guy. I can trust him, and I'm not saying that there's not a time and a place for agents. I think, obviously we just did that episode with Kelly, which was incredible. And a lot of athletes have benefited from her work and
Absolutely.
other people. But for us, where we were at, we didn't need it, right? Because, you know, I had you as my advocate. And even with the North Face, like, I leaned on you became my unofficial agent, more or less. So again, Aaron Lutzy's the best.
Well, you were my unofficial/official coach for
That's
trail
right.
running in that era too. we skipped over that part, but when I signed you, I also well, actually that first day, you gave me a copy of Born to Run. I gave you a Red Bull hat, you gave me Born to Run. I became a trail runner. I did that with all my athletes. If I didn't know their sport or if I didn't do their sport, I picked it up. And it was like for me, like the Matrix, where it's like, I know Kung Fu, like I can literally go to one of the best athletes in the world and be like, what should I do? And you wrote my training plan for me. You showed up at the first race I ever did at the finish line, at the start line. You were there cheering me on. You guided me through my training, and then I became a trail runner. Actually, in that race, there was a Red Bull at like mile 24 or something like that. And I remember being like in the bag. I had this Red Bull, and it was like the lights came back on. I was like, whoa, this stuff really works.
Yeah.
It really helped me later in these conversations with Austria be like, no, this stuff is like necessary for what trail runners are doing. We need to double down here.
Mm.
But that was like part of the relationship building too, because we had like started the relationship, but there was obviously room to grow with all of it. And so by picking up your sport and engaging in it, it helped us, I think, have even more stuff to talk about. It gave me more context to the sport. It allowed me to like really dig in and be like, you know, I was never going to ask you if you were going to run Barclays,
Yeah.
because I knew the deal. I had enough context to not ask stupid questions because I was involved in the
Well,
sport just enough to be dangerous. And we could have and brainstorm some really cool concepts because I was paying attention and I was actually like engaged in both you and the sport. So it wasn't just about like he's a great athlete, let's sign him to Red Bull. It was like no, I want to like double down on who is Dylan, what is his sport all about? How can we really like dig into this and really credibly be a part of it? And that was the way for me. It was like picking up other athlete sports, and that obviously played out in a bunch of other ways with other athletes, but that was important.
which I think really lent itself to us building the relationship that we did too. Let's see, we should emphasize the fact that that is not the usual orientation of a sports marketing person. And I think Red Bull is unique in the fact that you were supporting people from tons of different sporting verticals where, like, for example, at the North Face, they're sponsoring snow sports athletes, action sport athletes like climbers, and then they're sponsoring endurance athletes, trail runners, right? And so there's different people that manage each of those verticals, and those people have a deep understanding of each of the sports, right? But you had to have a deep understanding of tons of different sports, and the way that you did that was to actually put yourself in the fire. And I got to coach you. We got to run together a bunch. We did a few of the same races at that time also, like the North Face 50. I
Yep.
remember we both did that year.
Yep.
And
We did the
yeah, I don't
Lewitt.
know. It helped us build our friendship, our relationship, but yeah, also was like a symbolic thing of like, this dude's for real, like he's doing it too.
We did the Lewitt Trail together around St. Helens. That was when you started really getting into launching pillars and everything. I want to scoot back really quickly. One of the runs that you and I did in Forest Park, I remember vividly you talking about how much you loved talk radio, sports talk radio, and it felt so obvious on that run. Like, dude, podcasts, this would be perfect for you. You can talk to the best athletes in the world. Like, I think I had gone through this same exercise with Payson like a few weeks prior, and on that run, you were just talking about Bill Simmons and all this stuff that you were into, and I was like, this feels like a slam dunk, man. Like, you should definitely do that.
Yep. And here we are, and it's my job. And again, going back to point number one, Aaron Lutzi is the best. We will be circling this point forever. But
we
again, dude, like if I step back and look at my career, dude, like you are the guy. You are the guy who got me off my ass to start my podcast, which ultimately became what I do now with Free Trail. And you helped me, like, let's be frank, you gave me the money to buy all the equipment that I originally used. You gave me no excuse. Like, what can we do to support you? And like without that, and then I broke my ankle, which actually gave me a moment where I was like, okay, like maybe I should make progress on this now. And yeah, I mean, like without that, who knows? Like I would maybe be graduating as a Red Bull athlete right now with zero plan. And
right.
yeah, like it could have been a totally different present and future. And again, I'm just so grateful.
This whole thing, to be honest, was self-preservation for me, actually. I had nothing no, I'm just
Yeah,
kidding.
because we were
Uh,
buddies, and
yeah.
you didn't want to fire me someday and me not
Heck
have
no.
a backup
No
plan.
way, man. I think I've told this story on the pod before, but I went through one of those graduation meetings in person that totally broke me because I mean they've never they're not fun anyway, but like they've always been a really big struggle for every athlete manager and every athlete. They're not that great, you know? And Red Bull for almost everybody is a dream sponsor, and then to part ways is like a really bad feeling. And I was just thinking to myself, like, what could I do so that I could just not have to do this anymore? Like, how could I extend the value of the athletes that I work with? And around that same time, I was starting to work with Grand Pooh Bear, the gamer, and I saw how content and community kind of came together. And I was like, maybe that's it. Maybe like if I could figure out a way to adapt this to other sports, this might be the thing that helps like other athletes, you know, keep it going really and develop additional value. And Red Bull at the time, like their media house strategy it's never like media house seems like this really like finely running machine that just, dominates everything. But there is a lot of gray area, both with athletes and with the entire program itself. In fact, there was a Red Bull podcast. I think you may have even been on it at one point.
Yep.
Trey did
Right.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it was always some flexibility of like, well, like maybe we could support our athletes doing podcasts, or maybe we could plug our athlete into this or create this opportunity. And so for me, it was like, okay, how do I figure out how to like draw some support over here to like help Dylan just like start the building? I could have never have guessed that it was going to become what Free Trail is today. I only saw the direction that you wanted to go philosophically, and I tried to give you those first couple tools to like start that journey, and then I pushed because I knew that like you had enough inside you to be like, I love this. I would love to do this. And I saw like, oh, well, two steps ahead. This, if he pulled this off, like this would be a huge thing for maybe Media House for him. Like it would be so easy for me to go into the business planning meeting next year and assign resources to it, because look at this other thing he's doing in addition to racing, in addition to the Lost Coast project that we did, in addition to this, like there's another whole layer to this athlete. I have even more reasons to continue re-signing him because he's creating media that matters
Yeah.
within a meaningful vertical.
And
And
let's be honest, dude, that probably kept me on board for a couple more years than I otherwise would have had with the brand,
yeah,
right? Because they saw that I was pushing on something
yeah,
that was intended to be important for the sport and for the community. So even if it wasn't me trying to win races or smash podiums or break FKTs, it was something that Red Bull could point to and be like, okay, well, Dylan's actually doing cool stuff.
yeah,
Like let's continue to support him. And especially when it was paired in conjunction with open and honest dialogue of me saying like, hey, this is what I'm focused on right now. Like, I'm not going to lie to you and say I'm in great shape and I've got all these big goals. Like, dude, my son is 6 months old. I'm like working on my business. Like, I'm trying to like just survive right now, but I do want to be an athlete again.
right.
So they were able to sort of see that, and again, it was born out of you sort of giving me that inspiration. So
I think as an athlete manager, you always want to have these highlights that you're sharing on a regular basis with your athletes internally, right? So I have to go into a monthly marketing meeting where I say, like, Dylan's doing this, Kate's doing this, Carson's doing this. Like, I always want to be like hyping up everybody that's on my roster and what they're doing. But the real challenge is that in your sport, you were doing what, 4 to 6 races a year, like big ones that you would potentially have the chance to win or podium or whatever. And so how do I raise the volume on what you're doing if you're only going to race 4 to 6 times a year? I don't know, I'm making that number up, but
yeah,
like
that's accurate.
you're
Yeah,
not racing every single week of, you don't have the same calendar as a lot of the other athletes. So what are those other like spikes that I can be highlighting throughout the year oh, Dylan's podcast this week got this many views or had this person on, or hey, he included another Red Bull athlete in this thing, or his media stuff is doing that. It gave me a higher frequency and ability to speak on what you were doing even more throughout the year so that I could keep you top of mind. So that when it came time for the re up conversation, it was like, oh, that's funny. We haven't heard Dylan's name in a year. What's he
Yeah.
up to?
See, I think this is another really good actionable thing for
Yeah.
pros and aspiring pros. Is like, what ammunition can you give to your athlete manager to make their job easier when advocating for you internally? And
Yeah.
really, it is all about like, here's what I'm doing,
Yeah.
like, here's how my training's going. Here are my next goals. Here's what I'm struggling with right now. But here's what I'm excited about. And then that person, when they ultimately have a conversation with their boss, they can speak intelligently and coherently about the reality of your situation and whether it's good or bad. If it's bad, they have a point to understand why and develop an empathy for it. And if it's going well, to how do we pour gasoline on the fire?
Yeah. I want to talk about a few things before we kind of wind it down. But one of the things that I think is really interesting about your time at Red Bull is that it wasn't just racing. You had projects that we were doing as well. So the Lost Coast project is probably the one that I would point to as like one of the big ones. We also did a project called Campfire Stories, which was like a cartoon about the time you got bit by a dog in the middle of a race that you ended up winning. And then we did, there's another piece of content I found called Last Set, where we were like asking you trivia questions while you were doing a workout. That was a fun format that Red Bull did quite a bit. But Lost Coast was like a proper project, and it was really like you racing the tides in Northern California. There was like an FKT attempt, but to do the FKT, you had to time out like the tides because the trail would be underwater for part of it. Talk about the going between being a racer and doing projects, and what did you learn from kind of being thrust into this project?
Yeah. I would say that the project side of things I was slow to appreciate because I've always been a competition focused athlete, and even as a fan of sport, I care more about the head to head competition than the inspiring aspirational projects. And I know there's people who have a different orientation, but that was always mine. So I approached the Lost Coast thing with a competitive objective. I want to break this FKT. And so it felt like an unofficial race, more or less. I can't remember exactly what the construction of my season was at the time, but from memory, I think it was right in between two other races that I was doing that year that also went really well. And so it ended up becoming almost like a big important training day for a longer race 6 or 8 weeks later. I'd have to go back and review, but that's how my memory serves. And it ended up being like, yeah, one of those really super memorable days of my career. Something like 55 miles along the Central California Lost Coast. Beautiful, unbelievable terrain. And yeah, we made a cool video out of it. And I think, that was one of those things that also helped expose me, like where Red Bull's influence and microphone helped to just build my profile, right? Of like when a project, a film goes out with Red Bull's backing about trail running and I'm the featured athlete, it does a lot to solidify you as being, you know, um, I don't know, just raising your profile within the sport, within
Yeah.
the minds of people who are following it.
There was one project that got away, which actually was something that Ethan Newberry and I were working on. It was the Forest Fen
Oh yeah.
lost treasure thing. I remember he came to me with this idea of like, yeah, we're gonna go out and try to find this like lost treasure, and I was like, oh, okay, but like, do you want to find it? And he was like, I mean, I was like, what if we got like a bunch of cryptologists and people to like decode all this stuff, and we put resources into like that, and then we found it? Like, wouldn't that be a better finish to the thing? And like, we did the science part too, and then we put like trail runners on it to like follow up on the clues and whatever. People were super pumped on that project internally. Um, Unfortunately, we never got the resources to do it, but that would have been one of the coolest projects.
That
and
would have been
then
fire.
like a year later, somebody found
Nobody found it.
the treasure, which, um, yeah, man, what a bummer. We could have
Ah,
that would have been one of the best Red Bull films of all time, I think, and
we would have been rich, dude.
yeah, that was a fun one. Like, well, what if we could find it? Like, oh, wait, I hadn't thought about that. Like, why not? Let's hunt it down. One thing I wanted to talk to you about. You've obviously been really generous with your praise of me, and I appreciate that a lot. I would love to know how you dealt with me leaving, because around 2021 I made the decision to move on. I went to go work for Aura, in which I then came back around and supported you and Free Trail with some
It's
partnership
true.
dollars.
That's right.
But like, you know, in a way, I had been like your key man at Red Bull, and you'd worked with other people within the business for sure. But then to go from having like your main person leave, how did you rebuild the relationship with Red Bull with me not being there as an advocate? And I think Lisa may have left around that time as well.
Yeah. I recall I was in France at UTMB when you called to tell me that you were leaving. And I recall it wasn't like a massive surprise. I can't exactly, like, I think you had been transparent with me about the fact that you had other irons in the fire. You were being recruited, I think, at the time. And so the good thing is that our relationship was built on friendship, at that point. And so I was happy for you. I was like, this is cool. And yeah, like you said, you Lisa Burns me, you went to Aura, and we were able to continue a little bit of a partnership at your next landing spot, which of course was massively appreciated. But yeah, I mean, it is a loss, right? Like you were my advocate, you were my guy. I think, yeah, Lisa was either about to leave or had left already at that point too. And so it was a little bit of a new beginning. Um, I felt, I don't know, secure in my position with the brand based on the work that you had done, and, the handoff that then happened once you were replaced. Because in the interim, we should also remind people, when you left, there was something like, what, 1,500 people applied for your job. It's like, it was like the most the highest demand for any job like ever on LinkedIn history.
Who wouldn't want that job? I mean,
Seriously.
and people have asked me a lot, like, why would you give that up? Well, what, and I really felt like I got a chance to do everything that I wanted to do. I really brought the people that I wanted into the role. I got to support them in context that was shortly after the pandemic had begun. And so my role leading into 2020 was always to be additive to an athlete's program, where it's like, how can I bring more and more and more to that athlete? And I felt like after 2020, a lot of brands were sort of panicking of like, oh, we can't go out and do photo shoots. We need them to send me a photo or a video or whatever. And I felt like for the bulk of 2020 and 2021, my relationship with my athletes went from bringing them stuff to asking for stuff. And that was basically the reason, yes, I did get recruited, but that was sort of my reason for entertaining those conversations, because I was like, I feel like my reason for being here is sort of like not the same anymore. And I don't
See,
want
but
to.
again, isn't this the whole point of the conversation?
Mm,
All good things come to an end, and it
yeah,
was the right time for you at the time.
yeah,
And I felt confident in that too, and I was happy for you when you did make that move. And, again, luckily I had established myself with the brand and had built a good relationship, and, um, was able to continue it on in your absence. And, um, but yeah, I mean, like, nobody's Aaron Lutzi, right? And so we continued to have our friendship on the side, which ultimately is, turned into something new, what we're doing now. And I have faith that, there will be more manifestations of our relationship over time.
yeah. Yeah, I think this, there's so many people moving around now at brands and in the industry and stuff like that. like the real lesson is that those people will likely go on to do something else that will come back around in your favor. And so it's always important to show up with integrity, but also, maintaining your momentum at the brand, and also building relationships with more people at that brand so that if your key person leaves, you're not stuck in a lurch. And you had a lot going on. You had Free Trail up and running by the time I left, I'm pretty sure. Or you were
It
doing
was in the very very early stages. Yeah.
yeah. So you had momentum going into it. I didn't completely drop the ball or whatever. But I think that like that's a really important thing of like one of the things I also tried to do is like introduce you to more people within the company, so that even without me being there, there was someone for you to reach out to if you needed anything or whatever.
I
Because
think you also more or less like, because I'm pretty sure my contract was up, and I think you more or less had me teed up for my extension too before you left.
I think we signed it right before I left because
Yeah, I
Lisa,
think that's
Lisa
right.
and I were like, "Hey, let's just like sort this out real quick."
That's right. Yeah, that's exactly what happened.
But I mean, it can be different, right? Like when you leave and someone else picks up where you left off, it's never going to be the same. It's never going to be, the original guy that brought you in or whatever, but you have to like keep going and keep the relationship with the brand strong and keep bringing value, and hopefully there's enough momentum in place. But I always find that really interesting of like, oh, my relationship with the person is a big part of my relationship with the brand.
Yeah.
How do I operate when that person isn't here anymore?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, luckily it continued to be a positive one after you left. But yeah, like nobody's Aaron Lutzy.
I just think it's interesting. Like, yeah, we had a lot of time to sort of establish that stuff, but yeah, there was like there's a good blueprint of like how to continue on, and I think that was on both of us to build it and then keep executing on that. And by that point, you kind of understood like how to bring projects, how to share updates, how to do your thing. That was one thing that Rebecca Rush did really well. She would send like a quarterly update of like, here's all the stuff I did this quarter, and it was like understanding how the athlete managers and how the internal structures actually worked. Those updates went such a long way internally, just to be like, here's what's actually
Well,
happening.
I
Yeah.
mean, should at least flag for the audience, go back and listen to the Rebecca Rush episode of Second Nature that Lucy did. One of our very earliest shows, and a profoundly brilliant education for how to be a long-term professional athlete. Yeah.
I think that was my first solo pod. You were somewhere else. That was the first
I
time I had to
remember
go
calling
solo.
you while I was listening to it, like, dude,
I
this
was
is like the greatest podcast I've ever heard.
I was
Anyway,
terrified.
we're obviously going super long form here. Is there anything else you want to touch on before we wind down?
I think we talked a fair bit about Free Trail through that era. I guess this is sort of the end of an era. It's an end of a chapter, but clearly there's another one ahead that's going to be interesting and exciting and everything. I would love to know from you, like, what do you see this next chapter? Like, what's it going to look like now that Red Bull, in one capacity has moved on? Clearly, there will be some relationship moving forward with the team,
Yeah.
with Media House, with events. What's it look like? What is
Yeah.
the next chapter going to be?
Yeah, this is actually the perfect thing to touch on before we wind down. So, as part of this very collaborative, multi-year conversation that we've been having that is now culminated in my graduation, we have talked about different ways that we can work together. And Red Bull did support some of our coverage of UTMB last year. They also, in the past, have been supportive of our events, the Big Alta and Gorge Waterfalls. Through Free Trail, we do have an opportunity to help Red Bull touch the free trail. I'm sorry, the trail running market in multiple different ways, should they want that. And it does seem that there is now a lot more energy behind trail running as a sport internally, which is really exciting for me. And I'd like to think that I played a small part in getting them to that point. One thing I would really love to do that I have offered my help on is to identify and help them recruit the next generation of trail athletes in whatever business unit they need help with. I'd really relish that opportunity. I've actually been doing a lot of work, Lutzi, on like identifying, building my own sort of like life's mission, like mission statement, purpose. And the thing that I've sort of triangulated towards is the thing that makes me feel best is providing opportunities for other people, whether it's like, hey, just want to give you a platform to tell your story, or doing things like, if there's some way I could do what you did for me, get somebody connected with a brand that will change their life, that would give me endless, good feelings. So those are different ways that hopefully I'll be able to continue the working relationship with Red Bull. But again, it's going to be through Free Trail, not through Dylan Bowman. And that's a perfect representation of where I'm at in my life right now. And that's how it should be. I shouldn't be wearing the hat myself anymore. It's the right time. And hopefully, we can do stuff at big events together where, I can still sing their praises and talk about the product and boost their athletes, but not be one of those athletes myself. So that's my hope. And the conversations are ongoing, which is great.
That's awesome. Just holding the door open for then that next Dylan Bowman that's waiting in the wings. I mean,
Yeah.
that is sort of the thing. There will be another, bright face in trail running that comes from the US at some point, and they will likely come from, you backing them to get them through that door. And that's really exciting, kind of like how this all continues on, and getting athletes to the right level of support. And
Yeah.
man, I mean, I just want to say,
You can imagine my blurbs in the next deck, right?
yeah, yeah,
Like
absolutely.
Carl Meltzer and Ryan Sands provided in my deck.
You're gonna be that guy. I mean, dude, the reason why you were, as successful as you were, as with the brand as long as you were, is because who you are. Like, you showed up and made my job easy. Like, for all the nice things you said about me, like, I couldn't have done it if you didn't show up for me. You didn't. I mean, you could have said no to so much of the stuff that I ask you to do, whether it's going to speak at that thing in LA, or that one time you had to wake up at like 4 o'clock in the morning to give a distributor a check for like 100 grand. Like, I asked for a lot and you always came through for me. And so I always felt like I needed to come through for you. And so this was reciprocal in every way. And I get to, I guess, enjoy the praise here and elsewhere. But I think, like, you obviously deserve just as much, if not more, for the effort that you put into this partnership and this relationship and stuff. And I'm just really happy that, it's the best feeling ever to know that we have like a real friendship and a real relationship, and it's not defined by a 2-year contract.
Totally. Yeah.
It makes it even more special now than it did even back then.
Love you, bro.
Love
Thank you
you.
for saying that. Appreciate
Yeah.
it a lot. Appreciate it a lot. And yeah, what an amazing chapter. And it's great to be able to just talk through all of it together. A lot of great memories, a lot of things to be proud of. And yeah, also a lot of things to be excited about for the future, both together with what we do, but also independently. And obviously, we're both in each other's corner on the things that we do independently also. And yeah, I think also hopefully valuable for the Second Nature community to get a glimpse into how this relationship came to be, the ups and downs along the way, and sort of some of the learnings that are at least front of mind for both of us as the chapter comes to a close.
What a journey. Chapters closed, onwards and upwards. The next chapter is going to be even wilder.
All right. No BPC today. We got to close it there.
That was everything I hoped it was going to be. Honestly, I like, this was the ultimate bro pod, the chance to reflect on like such a wild experience that we both got to go through sort of together. And man, it's just been so fun being like your partner through so much of this stuff. And yeah, how cool.
Bro pod of the century. All right, Second Nature community, go check out the deck that Lucy's going to post in Slack.
It's
And
so
yeah,
good.
review the pod wherever you're listening. Sign up for the newsletter, secondnature.media. Follow us on LinkedIn, Instagram, etc. We're just getting started, Lucy.
That's right. That's right.
Not graduating from Second Nature yet. Come on. For Aaron Lucy, I'm Debo. We'll see you guys next time. Peace out.